In the winter of 1983, an oil drilling crew working on exploratory surveys in the Yakutian mountains stumbled upon a stone burial mound that wasn't marked on any map. Inside the permafrost, they discovered the bodies of ancient people covered in strange tattoos that glowed in the darkness under their flashlights. One member of that expedition, drilling foreman Viktor Samoylov, decided to tell this story 10 years later. What he and his crew pulled from beneath meters of ice changed their lives forever. 4 out of 6 men died or vanished under mysterious circumstances within 5 years of that discovery. And Victor himself still hears a strange hum coming from deep underground every winter when the temperature drops to -40. This story began as a routine geological survey, but turned into something that defies science. Now, you'll hear his account, which he recorded on a dictaphone shortly before his disappearance in 1995. What had been kept in that burial mound for thousands of years should probably have remained buried forever.
In early February 1983, our oil drilling crew, conducting exploratory surveys for potential deposits in the mountains of eastern Yakutia, suddenly found ourselves at the center of an event that turned our entire understanding of the world upside down. I'm Viktor Samoylov, drilling foreman, and years later I remember that incident as clearly as if it happened yesterday, though more than 10 years have passed. There were 6 of us: me, my partner Gennady Voronov, crew chief Pyotr Kuzmich Lojinov, and 3 other workers, Semyon Arkhipov, Vasily Tretyakov, and Ivan Kresnov. We were based in a temporary camp at about 1,000 meters above sea level, in an area where geological surveys indicated there should be an oil-bearing formation. The work was hard, temperatures stayed below -40 degrees, equipment constantly failed. We had to warm up engines and change frozen oil every morning. Supply runs came once every 2 weeks by helicopter, if weather permitted, and if it didn't, we could be cut off from the world for a month. Communication worked through radio, but even that would die in severe cold when batteries drained quickly, so most of the time we were on our own. The nearest settlement, the village of Ust-Nera, was 200 kilometers to the west, and you can only get there by helicopter or tracked vehicle. The surrounding terrain was wild, mountain ridges covered with larch and dwarf pine, deep ravines where snow lay year-round. The Yakuts from nearby villages avoided these mountains, saying the place was bad, that evil spirits lived there. But we paid no attention, considered it superstition.
The first thing that caught our attention, as I later told investigators, was strange warmth rising from the ground in the middle of winter taiga, where the temperature held at -42 degrees. This happened on the 8th day of our work at the new site. We'd just set up the drilling rig and were preparing to start the first well. Gennady noticed it first. He was standing at the edge of the platform, smoking, when he suddenly called out to me, pointing east. There, about 1.5 kilometers from our camp, above the tree line, a column of steam was rising, straight and clear, like from a boiler pipe. We knew perfectly well from all geological maps that there were no geothermal sources in this area. We were absolutely certain. Nothing like this could exist here. Pyotr Kuzmich got out binoculars, looked for a long time, then passed them to me, and I also saw this strange column of steam rising straight up in the still, frozen air. There was no wind, the air was dead still, and this steam just rose upward about 20 meters, then dissipated. Wild terrain, uninhabited, not a single settlement within 200 kilometers radius, just permafrost and mountains. But there was heat, and this gave none of us peace, because in such cold, any heat source is an anomaly requiring explanation. Maybe a geothermal vent, Semyon suggested, though nothing like that was on the maps, or a crack in the ground through which warm air rises from the depths. Pyotr Kuzmich got out binoculars, looked for a long time, then passed them to me, and I also saw this strange column of steam rising straight up in the still, frozen air. There was no wind, the air was dead still, and this steam just rose upward about 20 meters, then dissipated. Wild terrain, uninhabited, not a single settlement within 200 kilometers radius, just permafrost and mountains. But there was heat, and this gave none of us peace, because in such cold, any heat source is an anomaly requiring explanation. Maybe a geothermal vent, Semyon suggested, though nothing like that was on the maps, or a crack in the ground through which warm air rises from the depths. Pyotr Kuzmich said we needed to check, because if there really was a geothermal source there, it could affect our drilling operations, change the survey plan.
Without discussion, Gennady and I volunteered to go. We were younger and stronger than the others, and curiosity gnawed at us from inside. We took radios, flashlights, a compass, spare batteries, a thermos of hot tea, some food, and just in case, rope and ice axes. We dressed properly. 2 pairs of pants, 3 pairs of socks, felt boots, fur jacket, ushanka hat, fur mittens, and a windbreaker over everything. In such cold, you can get frostbite to the bone in half an hour in the wind, so proper gear was a matter of life and death. We left around 2 in the afternoon. The sun was low on the horizon, shining dimly, more for visibility than warmth. It was the 8th day of brutal cold, when even your breath turned into ice crystals settling on your beard and eyelashes as frost. Snow crunched loudly underfoot. Seemed like you could hear it a kilometer away. The air was so clear that visibility reached dozens of kilometers. We walked slowly, checking the route, going around deep snowdrifts, pushing through thickets of dwarf pine that clung to our clothes with prickly branches. Everything around was locked in ice. Trees stood like frozen statues, branches covered with thick frost sparkling in the weak sun. The sky hung low, covered with a whitish veil. The air was thick, pressing, filled with some anxious heaviness. The closer we got, the clearer the feeling became that something was wrong with this place, like the air here was different, denser, more viscous. After about 40 minutes of walking, we came out onto a small plateau between 2 hills, and there we saw the source of steam rising from behind a rock outcrop. When we reached the place where, by our calculations, this steam should be rising from, an astonishing picture opened before us, one that didn't fit any framework. In a fold between 2 low hills, in the middle of absolute emptiness, stood a huge stone burial mound, partially covered with snow but clearly of artificial origin. This wasn't a natural formation. This was a man-made structure, and it had been standing here for who knows how long, perhaps thousands of years, surviving all changes in climate and nature. The diameter of this structure reached about 20 meters, height about 5 meters, and it was all built from massive stone slabs, some of which clearly weighed more than a ton. The slabs were covered with patterns, partially worn away by time and wind but still distinguishable, spirals, zigzags, images of animals, some signs resembling ancient writing. At first glance, we noticed nothing special except the fact that no such object was on any of our maps, and we'd studied them all thoroughly. We walked around the mound, examining the masonry, trying to understand who and when could have built such a thing in this wilderness, with what tools they processed these stone blocks. The stones were fitted together with amazing precision, without any mortar, just slab on slab, and everything held due to weight and proper placement. But there was one circumstance that immediately gave us a feeling of alarm. On the north side of the mound gaped a black opening, from which warm steam poured. The entrance was low, about 1.20 meters in height, and a person of average height could pass through by bending only slightly, and it looked like an invitation, like the open mouth of something ancient waiting. Around the mound, within a radius of about 15 meters, there wasn't a single animal track, as if all living things avoided this place, sensing danger at the level of instinct.
Gennady and I looked at each other, and in his eyes I saw the same thing I felt myself, a mixture of fear and curiosity, a desire to get away from here and at the same time a desire to know what was inside. Gennady said, "Maybe it's an old mine, abandoned back in the 30s when they were looking for gold or other ores here," but the explanation seemed unconvincing. "Or it's an ancient burial, one of those mounds that nomads built thousands of years ago that they wrote about in scientific journals. Such finds existed in the Altai." On the stones at the entrance there was no ice, which should have covered everything in such cold, as if warm air from inside didn't let ice form, constantly melting it. We put our hands on the stones, and they were warm, not hot, but noticeably warmer than the surrounding air, as if a fire burned inside the mound. Gennady took out a thermometer and measured the temperature at the entrance, +2 degrees, while 3 meters from the entrance it was -40. A difference of 42 degrees over a distance of 3 meters is physically impossible without a powerful heat source, and we nodded silently to each other, understanding that we'd encountered something inexplicable. We got out flashlights, checked batteries, contacted the camp, told Pyotr Kuzmich that we'd found some kind of ancient structure and were going to enter. He warned us to be careful, and if something went wrong, to return immediately, and he would keep in touch and wait for our reports every 15 minutes. We agreed and decided to go inside together, not separating, because neither he nor I dared to go alone. The place was too eerie. Gennady bent down first and stepped through the opening. I followed and immediately felt the temperature change. It became noticeably warmer. The air was humid, smelled of earth and something strange, sweetish, cloying.
The tunnel was narrow, its walls lined with the same stone slabs, smooth, polished, and the farther we went, the warmer the air became. The floor was level, with a slight downward slope, and walking was easy, though the ceiling hung low and we had to stay bent over. After about 15 meters, the tunnel widened, the ceiling rose, and we could straighten up, which brought relief to our backs, and drawings appeared on the walls. Images of deer running after each other, figures of people with raised hands, sun or moon with radiating rays, hunting scenes of large animals. I ran my hand along the wall. The stone was dry, warm, and under my fingers I could feel every scratch, every line carved by ancient tools thousands of years ago. We walked further. The tunnel wound, sometimes rising, sometimes descending, and gradually we lost our sense of direction, not understanding how deep we'd gone underground. I tried to call the camp on the radio, but communication was lost, only crackling and hissing in the speaker, though we weren't that far from the entrance. Another 20 meters on, the tunnel suddenly widened, and we emerged into a large chamber where the temperature was about 5 to 7 degrees above zero, which at -40 outside seemed simply incredible. The chamber was round, about 10 meters in diameter, with a high domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above our flashlight beams. The walls were smooth, processed, and all around the perimeter ran a frieze of carved images, processions of people leading animals, scenes of feasting, dancing, rituals, an entire history of an ancient tribe's life. In the center of the chamber rose a stone structure resembling an altar, about a meter high, and on it lay 4 bodies, arranged with heads toward the center like spokes of a wheel.
I brought the flashlight closer, and we saw what made us freeze in place, forgetting even to breathe for several seconds. These were mummies, perfectly preserved thanks to the permafrost and special conditions inside the mound, but somehow not frozen, as if this strange heat specially protected them. 2 men and 2 women lay in a row, dressed in leather clothing with fur embroidered with bone beads, decorated with metal plates, bracelets on arms and legs. Their skin was dark, desiccated but retained all facial features: high cheekbones, straight noses, thin lips, eyelids closed. Long black hair was braided, decorated with copper and silver rings, beads of semi-precious stones, feathers of some birds. Around the necks of all 4 hung massive necklaces of fangs, possibly bear or wolf, strung on leather cord, indicating their high status in the tribe. But the most amazing thing was that their bodies, arms, faces, even eyelids, were covered with a solid pattern of tattoos of incredible complexity and beauty. Every line precise. Geometric spirals twisting clockwise, images of deer with branching antlers, wolves running in circles, birds with outstretched wings, fish intertwining in schools. Some symbols resembling runes or ancient writing stretched along arms, legs, across chests, forming lines or spells whose meaning was incomprehensible to us. The patterns covered every centimeter of visible skin on these people, leaving not a single empty space, turning their bodies into sacred texts. I'd seen photos of all-time mummies in magazines, but what lay before us surpassed everything in degree of preservation and richness of detail.
The only detail that seemed strange to us from the very beginning was that the tattoos shimmered, changed shade in the light of our flashlights, playing with different colors. At first we thought it was a play of light, reflection from moisture on the skin, or peculiarities of the pigment used for applying the design, some mineral substance. But then Gennady directed the beam straight at the arm of one of the women, holding the flashlight motionless, and we both saw something impossible, not fitting any logic. The pattern on her arm glowed from within, with a faint bluish glow, pulsing rhythmically, slowly and steadily, as if a heart beat inside or some energy flowed through invisible channels. We stood, unable to tear our eyes from this impossible sight, and cold ran through us not from temperature, but from the realization of something wrong, something not of this world. This wasn't light reflection. This was actual glow coming from the depths of the skin, as if underneath was a source of light, soft and cold, not warming. Gennady reached out to touch the tattoo, but I grabbed his wrist, stopping him instinctively. Some inner sense of self-preservation told me not to do it. We walked around the stone elevation, examining the other bodies, and all four had these same glowing patterns, especially bright on the chest, where spirals converged to the center, on palms and foreheads. At the head of each mummy stood wooden bowls filled with something that looked like hardened dark resin or dried blood, covered with frost. Nearby lay weapons, short swords with bone handles, horn bows, quivers with arrows whose tips were also covered with strange signs, ritual symbols.
On the chamber walls were visible carvings in stone, processions of people leading deer, hunting scenes of large animals, ritual dances around a fire where human figures merged into a circle. And above all this, at the highest point of the dome, was carved a huge image, sun or moon surrounded by rays, and beneath it a cross in a circle, an ancient symbol of the four cardinal directions. But the most eerie thing was that in the far corner of the chamber, where our flashlight beams barely reached, creating deep shadows, stood another figure that we didn't notice at first in the half-darkness. This wasn't a mummy, but a wooden statue, carved from a single trunk, depicting a person with deer antlers on the head, almost 2 meters tall, maybe even a bit more. The statue's face was turned toward the bodies, features worn away by time, but general outlines were discernible. High forehead, sunken eye sockets, straight nose, mouth slightly open in a frozen scream or song, teeth visible. Arms spread to the sides, palms open, as if the statue blesses the dead or summons them, fingers long like the talons of a predatory bird. And on the statue's chest was carved the same spiral pattern we saw on the mummies, deep, carefully worked, and in the center of the spiral was a hole, as if something had been inserted there once. The statue inspired fear, some primordial horror, as if it were not just a representation of a deity, but the deity itself, frozen in wood, watching over its charges for centuries. Gennady got out his camera and started photographing everything, the shutter clicking, flash brightly illuminating the chamber, and for a moment, everything inside came alive, shadows jumping on the walls. I wrote in my notebook measurements, descriptions, trying to record every detail, understanding that we'd stumbled upon a discovery that would revolutionize Siberian archaeology and make it into history books.
We spent about an hour inside the mound, maybe a bit more, though time flowed strangely, seemed shorter than longer. The sense of its passage was distorted. We were already preparing to leave, to return with the rest of the crew, with a better camera, with measuring instruments, maybe even call in archaeologists. But Gennady suddenly stopped at one of the mummies, a man with especially dense tattoos, and pointed at his clenched hand lying on the chest. "Look, something's clenched in the fist. See the gleam?" I came closer, bent down, shone the flashlight, and indeed saw that between the dried fingers of the mummy, something dark, shiny showed through, resembling polished stone or metal. We looked at each other, and I understood what he was thinking. We need to take this object to show experts, to prove the authenticity of our find, otherwise they might not believe us. Any archaeologist would say you can't touch anything, but we weren't archaeologists, we were oil workers, and our logic was simple: the find must be documented. I hesitated, feeling that this was wrong, that we were violating something important, some ancient prohibition, a taboo that had lain here for thousands of years, but Gennady was determined. "We don't want to steal," he said. "We'll just take it temporarily, show specialists, and then they'll properly excavate and study everything, do it all scientifically." Gennady carefully unclenched the fingers of the mummy. They yielded surprisingly easily, as if waiting for this moment, and from the fist fell a small stone the size of a walnut. The stone was black, deep black, polished to a mirror shine, and entirely covered with the finest carving of the same spiral patterns that were on the mummy's bodies. "It's warm," Gennady said quietly, "very warm, warmer than it should be." And when I took the stone in my hand, I felt a faint vibration, as if something inside was pulsing, beating in rhythm with a heartbeat.
We wrapped the stone in a handkerchief. Gennady stuffed the bundle into the inner pocket of his jacket, and we headed for the exit, lighting the way with flashlights, going through the same tunnel. But when we came outside, we were met with complete darkness, though by our feelings, we'd spent inside at most an hour, maybe an hour and a half, maybe two. I glanced at my watch and froze. The hands showed 11:15 in the evening, though we'd entered around 3 in the afternoon, according to the last note in my notebook. 8 hours had fallen out of our lives, as if they'd been cut out with a knife from time, erased, stolen. And this was the first real warning that we didn't understand. Gennady felt his pocket, checking the stone, and said it had become even warmer, almost hot, as if it had warmed from the body, absorbed the heat, though it should have cooled down. We tried to call the camp on the radio, but there was no connection, just crackling and interference, as if something was jamming the signal or the batteries had suddenly died. We walked back to camp, orienting by the searchlight visible from afar. The distance was about 1.5 kilometers in a straight line. But on the way, something strange began. Despite the cold, which was getting stronger by the minute, we became hot. We unbuttoned our jackets, took off our hats, and steam poured from us in columns. Gennady suddenly stopped, grabbed his chest, and said, gasping, that it was hard to breathe, as if the air had become too thick, viscous, and his lungs couldn't pump it. A few minutes later, the strange sensation covered me too. Dizziness, ringing in my ears, growing, and most importantly, a feeling that someone was following us, walking on our heels, repeating every step. I turned around several times, shone the flashlight back, but there was only darkness, snow, and our tracks stretching from the mound. Nothing more. No other tracks. No movement in the night taiga.
When we reached the camp, barely dragging our feet, we were met by all 4 other crew members. They surrounded us, all talking at once, and from their speech we understood they were already preparing to go search. They thought we'd frozen, gotten lost, or fallen into some crevice because we didn't answer the radio, though they'd been calling every 15 minutes, then every 5, then continuously. We told them about the mound, about the mummies, about the tattoos that glowed, and at first no one believed, decided that we'd imagined things from the cold, that we had hallucinations. But when Gennady took out the camera and the stone, everyone fell silent, looking at the black, polished artifact that gleamed dimly in the kerosene lamplight. Pyotr Kuzmich took the stone in his hands, turned it over, looked closely at the carving and said, In 30 years of work in Yakutia, I've never seen anything like this. This is a real find. We need to report to Yakutsk, to the Institute. Let specialists come and figure it out. This is a discovery, possibly one of the most significant in recent decades. We agreed, deciding to send a radiogram in the morning. But that night none of us really slept. Some were cold, though the barracks were heated. Some complained of nightmares, woke with screams, not understanding where they were. And Gennady didn't lie down at all, sat by the window, stared into the darkness toward the mound, not looking away, as if hypnotized. I asked him around 3 in the morning what was wrong, and he answered without turning his head that it seemed to him the stone in his pocket was pulsing, as if something alive inside, beating, trying to get out. I suggested throwing it away, but Gennady shook his head. No, this is an important find. We must pass it to scientists. Otherwise, everything was for nothing. All the risk, all the time, everything we went through that night.
In the morning, Pyotr Kuzmich sent a radiogram to Yakutsk, to the Geological Survey Department, describing the find, indicating coordinates, requesting instructions, and dispatch of an archaeological expedition. The answer came in 3 hours. Stay in place, don't touch the mound, expedition will go out in a week as soon as weather improves and there's a helicopter. We waited a week, continuing work, but something alarming, irreversible was happening to Gennady. He became increasingly withdrawn, refused food, lost weight before our eyes, cheeks sunken, eyes hollowed, skin took on a gray tint like those mummies. He didn't let go of the stone, constantly turned it in his fingers like prayer beads, and sometimes I noticed he was whispering something, looking at the patterns, lips moving but couldn't make out words. The other crew members also noticed the changes, whispered among themselves, cast worried looks, and Pyotr Kuzmich several times suggested evacuating Gennady to a hospital, but he refused, said everything was fine, just tired. At night he didn't sleep. I heard him tossing, getting up, walking around the barracks, going outside in just underwear, standing in the cold for 20 minutes, looking at the stars or toward the mound. Several times I tried to take the stone from him, hide it, but Gennady reacted instantly, almost aggressively, snatched the stone back, pressed it to his chest, and in his eyes appeared a gleam, almost insane. "This is mine," he said harshly. "I found it, and I'll give it only to archaeologists, no one else, not even you. This is my find, my responsibility to science." I backed off, not wanting conflict, understanding that Gennady was in some altered state, that something was happening to him, but not knowing how to help, what to do in such a situation. Pyotr Kuzmich suggested tying him up, forcibly taking the stone, throwing it away or burying it, but I talked him out of it, hoping that with the expedition's arrival, everything would resolve. They'd take the stone, and Gennady would return to normal, come to his senses.
After 8 days, a helicopter arrived with a group from the Institute, 3 archaeologists, 2 lab assistants, and a representative from the Culture Department, serious professionals with experience in Siberian excavations. We led them to the mound. Gennady walked ahead, quickly, almost running despite the deep snow, as if pulled there by a magnet, an invisible force that only he knew about. When the group descended into the chamber, Pyotr Kuzmich and I stayed outside, smoked, waited, talked about weather, avoiding the topic of the mound and the strangeness of recent days. I noticed that Gennady came out right after the archaeologists, literally a minute later, and stood at the entrance, looked into the tunnel, his face detached, as if he wasn't here but somewhere far away, in another world. I called to him loudly several times, but he didn't react, continued to stand motionless like a statue, and then suddenly turned and walked away from the mound, toward the mountains, north, where real wilderness began. I shouted after him, but Gennady didn't turn around, just walked his way, steady pace, farther through the snow, not deviating from course, as if he saw a goal ahead invisible to the rest. Pyotr Kuzmich rushed after him. I followed. We shouted, waved our arms, but Gennady sped up, not turning, not reacting to our voices, as if he didn't hear. We ran for about 5 minutes, gasping in the frozen air, until we reached the place where he disappeared behind a fold in the hill. But when we got there, in a few seconds, he was gone. Tracks led to a bare stone slab protruding from under the snow, and beyond them there was nothing at all, as if Gennady had simply dissolved into air, vanished, evaporated, as if he'd never existed.
We searched for him for 3 days, combed every ravine, every crevasse, called out, shone flashlights, left markers with food and clothing, but found nothing. No tracks, no body, no scrap of clothing, not a single sign that Gennady had been here, except those tracks that ended at the stone slab cut off as if by a knife. Meanwhile, the archaeologists worked in the mound, photographed, took measurements, extracted one of the mummies for laboratory research, packed it in a special container. When I asked the lead archaeologist, Elizabeta Borisovna Krylova, if they'd found any stones with carvings, especially in the mummy's hands, she looked at me strangely and said, "There were no stones there. We checked everything, examined each body, made a complete inventory." I insisted, said we'd seen the stone, held it, felt its warmth, its vibration, but she shook her head. "Perhaps you confused something. Maybe you saw jewelry, a metal pendant, and in the half-darkness, it seemed like a stone to you." When they developed the film from Gennady's camera, all the photos were overexposed, white spots, blurred silhouettes, as if the film had been opened to light, and only on one frame was something distinguishable, a dark figure at the tunnel entrance, back to the camera in long clothing reaching to the ground, and above the head rose some growths, symmetrical, resembling antlers, branching like a deer's. I didn't remember anyone standing there when we came out, didn't remember anyone in such clothing, and no one had antlers, but the figure was in the photograph, real, frozen. 2 weeks later, the expedition wrapped up. The mound was sealed, the entrance closed with a grate, sealed, and we returned to work, but without Gennady, and his absence was felt constantly, like a void, like an unhealing wound in the crew.
I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong, because from that moment the strangest thing began, something that continues to this day and gives no peace day or night. Every winter, when the temperature dropped below -30, I began to hear a call, quiet, insistent, coming from the depths of the earth or from my own head, a pull to go north, to the mountains, to that mound. In the very first winter after the find, in December of '83, Pyotr Kuzmich died. He went out of the house at night in just socks at -38 and froze 20 meters from the porch, not trying to return. Neighbors said he walked purposefully, not stumbling, as if someone was calling him, leading him by an invisible thread, and on his face was a smile, frozen, blissful, as if he saw something beautiful. A year later, Semyon Arkhipov died, heart attack amid perfect health. He was 38 years old. They found him at his workplace at the Rick, and in his hand he clutched a handful of earth that he'd somehow collected, dug out from under the snow. In '85, Vasily Trechikov disappeared, went into the Taiga hunting and didn't return. The search yielded no results, as if the earth had swallowed him like Gennady, without trace, without body, without explanations. Of the entire crew, only 3 of us remained alive, Ivan Krasnov and Andrei Sokolov, who joined us a bit later, and all 3 of us felt the same thing. In winter, we're pulled north, pulled physically, almost unbearably, like a magnet. I fought it, moved to another district of Yakutia, then left altogether for Irkutsk, got a job as a foreman at a factory. Life seemed to get better. Family appeared, children, reasons to live and not look back, but nothing helped. The call remained, returned every winter, like a chronic disease for which there's no cure, only temporary relief, only a short respite until the next winter.
Every winter, at full moon, when the cold is especially severe, Temperature drops below 40 and the sky is clear without clouds. I wake up around 3 at night, abruptly, without transition from sleep to wakefulness. And I see that my skin is covered with patterns, those same ones that were on the mummies. Thin, bluish lines glowing in the darkness with faint, cold light, appearing on arms, chest, stretching up the neck toward the face. They form spirals on shoulders, go under sleeves, cover palms, fingers, every curve of the body, following some laws of their own, ancient and incomprehensible. By morning, they disappear without trace, fade as if they never were, leaving no traces, no scars, no changes on the skin. But I feel their burning, their presence under the skin. The sensation that they didn't disappear but just hid, went deep, waiting for the next full moon, next winter when they'll appear again. Doctors say it's an allergy, reaction to cold, hives, something psychosomatic, manifestation of stress, post-traumatic syndrome from what we experienced in the mound. They prescribed antihistamines, sedatives, ointments, creams, pills, but nothing helped. The patterns returned each time like clockwork, exactly at full moon. But I know the truth that I can't prove, can't tell anyone, because they'd think me insane. I'm marked by that place, that mound, those ancient people. Their power passed to me. Ivan and Andrei feel something similar. We called several times, carefully, in hints discussed, afraid to speak directly. They also see patterns on their bodies in winter, hear the call, fight the desire to return to the mound. And then I had twins, 2 boys, Misha and Sasha, healthy, strong, developing faster than normal by all standards, ahead of their peers by a year, sometimes more. Doctors were amazed at their indicators, praised my wife and me for good genetics. But what scares me most is that they constantly draw the same thing, have been drawing since age 3, never stopping, every day.
Figures of deer with branching antlers raised to the sky, and above them a spiral twisted clockwise, glowing with dots. Those same patterns that were on the mummies' bodies, recognizable down to the smallest details. I never told them about that expedition, didn't show photographs, didn't mention the mound or mummies or Gennady, but their drawings exactly repeat the tattoos from the ancient people's bodies. Every line, every curve, every spiral in place, as if someone put these images in their heads. Transmitted through blood, through genes, through something I don't understand. Sometimes they draw in darkness, by nightlight, sit on the floor silently and trace the same lines, same symbols for hours, not distracted, completely absorbed in the process. I wake up in the middle of the night and see their bowed heads, hear the rustle of pencil on paper, and I'm overcome with horror from understanding that this passed to them, that the curse or blessing passed to the next generation, to my children. My wife doesn't know the whole story. I told her only fragments, said we found an ancient burial and one person disappeared, but nothing more. Didn't tell about the stone, about the patterns on my body, about the call I hear every winter. She attributes the children's drawings to childhood fantasy, to fascination with animals, to having seen similar pictures somewhere. But I see that this isn't fantasy. This is something else. And in those places where we found the mound, according to legends of local Yakuts, in ancient times lived shamans who could cross the boundary between worlds, see future and past simultaneously, traveled in dreams. Old people said these shamans applied power patterns to their bodies that allowed them to see spirits, talk with ancestors, control elements, heal or curse. But for this power, you had to pay. Part of your soul remained there in the other world, and when you died, you were buried in a special way, sealed in a mound so your power wouldn't come out, wouldn't harm the living.
These burials were sacred places forbidden to ordinary people, and those who disturbed the shaman's rest received a mark, became carriers of their power but also their curse simultaneously, paid for their audacity. But what was this stone that we found, if we found it at all and didn't imagine it, if it existed in reality and wasn't a collective hallucination or frost mirage? Why did it disappear if we both saw it, held it in our hands, felt its warmth, its vibration, its living energy pulsing inside like a heartbeat? How could the stone dissolve if Gennady carried it in his pocket, didn't let go of it, pressed it to his chest, considered it his find, his responsibility to science and history? Why did time flow differently inside the mound? Why did 8 hours turn into a moment or eternity? We still can't understand. Physics doesn't explain this phenomenon. How could the tattoos glow if it's ordinary paint, plant or mineral pigment introduced under the skin thousands of years ago? Where's the energy source? Where's the light? Where did Gennady disappear if the tracks ended at a stone slab? If we were seconds away from him? If he couldn't just dissolve into air without trace, without explanation? Why did almost everyone from our crew die or disappear except 3? Why specifically in winter? Why under such strange circumstances, with smiles on faces or with earth in hands? I still don't know the answers to these questions, and maybe it's better not to know some things, because knowledge carries the burden of responsibility, the burden of understanding, a weight that can't always be borne. But every winter, when the cold reaches 40 degrees, when the sky becomes especially clear and the stars especially bright, I still hear the call coming from under the ground, or from the depths of my own consciousness, from that part of me that remained in the mound.
The call to return there, to that mound, to those mummies, to that statue with deer antlers that stood in the corner of the chamber and looked at the dead with its empty eye sockets, like a guardian of eternity. For now I resist, hold on to family, to children, to the remnants of normal life, to work, to familiar routine, to everything that connects me to this world, to the world of the living. But I don't know how much longer I can hold out, because each year the call becomes louder, more insistent, harder to resist, requires more and more willpower, more and more reasons to stay here. Gennady couldn't. The others from the crew couldn't either. They gave in, followed the call, and disappeared or died, found what they were looking for, or what was looking for them, what had been waiting for them for centuries. And perhaps one day I won't return from another winter night, when the cold will be especially severe, and the moon especially full, when the patterns on my body appear brighter than usual, when the call becomes irresistible. I leave this recording as testimony, as a warning for those who someday find it or hear it. There are places on Earth better left undisturbed. There are artifacts not worth touching. There are boundaries that shouldn't be crossed without understanding the consequences. The ancients knew what they were doing when they buried their shamans in the mountain depths, covering their bodies with stones in the cold of permafrost, sealing them in mounds for millennia, isolating them from the world of the living. They sealed not just dead people, they sealed knowledge, power, curse, connection between worlds, a portal that should have remained closed until the end of time, until someone opened it again. And we, in our curiosity and overconfidence, and our thirst for discoveries and glory, broke this seal and released what shouldn't have come to light, what should have remained in darkness, in cold, in oblivion,